Hello, my friends, and welcome back. We are here with another episode of the Play Along Journal series. I'm excited for this one. So, starting out in my mustard colored journal here, I have a little flip out that at first was a little holder for a gift card from a coffee shop, and I thought it would be really fun to include in one of my art journals. So, I like to think about items that are maybe not typical to use and keep them for purposes like this. So, some of my favorite items actually come from reclaimed sources. So, start thinking about your things that you come in contact with on a daily basis a little bit differently. And could you save them? Could you repurpose them somehow to make them fun for your art journaling practice? So I could have left that logo, the coffee logo there on there. I decided I was going to do a few little collage elements and kind of make that flip out a little bit more purposeful. And so I took some paper and then some washi tape also to use as um, collage elements. So now I want to add a few bold graphic marks onto my page. And so I'm going to use this. It was, I think, actually for a spool of thread, maybe. And I'm going to use it as a stamp. And so I really like the bold circle that it gives me. And it's kind of an inconsistent circle, which I really like too. And so I'm using my black gesso to get a bold mark there and just deciding where I want that all on my page. One fun thing that I like to think about, especially when it comes to different shapes and circles, is not always trying to include that full shape on the page. So you can see on the left side there, I had some of those shapes going off the side. Especially when you're working in a small journal, it seems like we try to fit that whole shape onto the page itself. And sometimes that can make it feel like the page is too contained. So when we take those shapes and take them off the sides and let them kind of run a little bit more wild, I think it brings a little bit more freedom into our work. It makes it feel more organic and less like we're trying to squeeze everything in. I I didn't do it on this page, but a lot of times I like to consider actually using like a disproportionately larger shape than what that journal page would typically allow for. So using like a larger circle and then having a lot of it go off the side. So then you just kind of see the arc of that circle. So, different things to consider there that we don't always have to include that full element on the page, having it run off the side and either just letting that piece run off, or we can cut it down to still the shape of the journal page. Either one goes. So, I have this little tag insert here made from a paint swatch, and I went ahead and I painted the back with leftover black gesso and then just added some bold graphic white marks onto that. Next up, I wanted to add some sort of element onto the back of this flip out. And so I searched in my pre-cut out little botanical elements and found this little leaf design that I liked. It's from a stamp, and I just had some already pre-stamped and pre-fussy cut out. This makes it a lot easier to use in your art journal because you don't have to stop and then make those elements. You can just pull from your stash, and it kind of helps you to stay in the workflow a little bit better rather than having to stop and find a stamp it out, and then fussy cut it out. So you can definitely work both ways. I really enjoy pulling from a stash of already pre-done elements. It just helps me to keep moving at a nice pace and I don't get as stagnant in my workflow. So I added in some dark washi tape behind it and a few different washi tapes for collage elements. This allows that botanical to really be a focal point because I'm setting it on that darker background and just allows it to have a little space to shine and be the star. Rather than a light color on the light background, I set it on something darker to make it stand out a little bit better. All right, so now I have the rest of my page here to work on, and I'm wanting to bring in a few different collage elements. So I just pulled out some scraps from my scrap box here, and I'm continuing just to work in these black and white colors for this one. I really enjoy often coming back to just working in black and whites. I find that there is a lot of room actually for flexibility, just with this very limited, you could say, non-color palette, because you start to think about more the shades and the values of your colors, getting in the lights and the mediums and darks versus when you're working with all colors. It's very easy to pick either all saturated colors or all muted colors, and you don't get as much variety. And I often find myself working in all like the medium tones rather than getting in all of those different elements that I like to see. I used my circle punch and I punched out a couple different circles, and it was actually from a old paint palette, I think. And then I just picked the one that I liked the best. And I'm considering here all what I want to do on the page, if I want to add in some more circles or just keep it as that one kind of focal point there. I like the idea of the circles because I'm bringing back in those smaller circles that I stamped towards the beginning. And so, even though it's not exactly the same, I'm bringing back in some of those elements that are bringing some cohesion throughout the journal spread overall. I'm adding in just little pieces of washi tape that act as little collage elements and bring a little bit of interest back into the page overall. I really liked where the page was going, but I felt like it was just missing a little bit of something. And so I decided that it needed a little bit of a grunge element. And so I came in with my Stabilo All pencil. And now with a wet paintbrush, I'm just kind of spreading that pigment around. You can use that Stabilo All in a couple different ways. I could have dipped the pencil directly in water. Oftentimes I find myself using it like this, where I draw on the page and then take my paintbrush and spread that around. And I even used some of that pigment to kind of color in and shade that leaf design over on the right side. And I feel like it gives it a little bit more depth and value. Last up on the page, I'm going to come in with a few um, white marks here to just liven up the page a little bit. The stripes there kind of go with the stripes on the right side. I think I could have left it how it was, but I think it's hard to know when to stop and when to keep going. And so over time, you just get more and more comfortable with that. And it's easy to look back at the page once it's all completely done and say, oh, I should have stopped. But it's something that we have to try to practice while we're actually working on it. And sometimes that means we have to step away from the page and come back. So I'm going to get started here on my teal version of this page, and my flip out there is actually just a little tag instead of a flip out pocket insert. And I'm adding in some bold graphic black on this page as well. And this time I'm actually using the wrong end of an awl that I had, a bookbinding awl, and the tip actually was broken and I was going to throw it away, and then I saw the other end of it and it was like, "Oh, that would make a really fun stamp." And it's kind of an inconsistent stamp where it just depends how much gesso that was happened to be gesso, how much paint you put on the end where it then looks either kind of like a grungy stamp or completely opaque. So you can really play around then with how much paint you put on that. And since it's not made to be a stamp, um, it's kind of fun to see the inconsistencies there. So I brought in some scribble marks as well on that page and did it kind of in a circular motion to emulate the circle punches that, or excuse me, not the punches, the stamps that I had just done. And I'm I'm considering here what elements I'm going to add in. I think it would be fun to add in a little bit of that teal color just because the tag on the right-hand side has that teal in it. And so I want to kind of bring that back. Looks like my paint was not all the way dry, and so it kind of smudged there, but overall, I'm okay with how that looks. I'm not going to be too fussy about it. It just adds to the overall texture of the page. I added a little bit of that teal collage paper on the right side as well, just bringing some of those elements together. I wanted to add a quote onto the left side of the page, and I'm just deciding exactly how I'm going to do that. I found the quote that I wanted to use, and I already had this pre-typed out and ready to go, and it just makes it a lot easier to pull from that stash. And I wanted a little bit of interest underneath it. So nothing too extreme, but I had these little tiny cutout pieces that I had from something else and I saved them. And so I'm deciding here if it would be fun to kind of layer them behind the quote. Um, Nothing that's going to draw the interest away, but just a little added something. That quote needs to stand out from the background a little bit more, so I'm coming in with my dry brush with some white gesso and gessoing that on. And I then decided that I wanted to add in some texture onto the page. So I'm taking, it's actually some flexible fishing line and stitching around the outside of that little piece carefully. It's a thin piece of paper, so I'm just making sure I'm not pulling too tight on that. The fishing line is actually um, some that my husband took off his fishing pole because it had gotten like too stretched out or something to actually fish with. Who knows what all the proper terminology is there, but I thought it would make a really fun design choice in some of my art journals, and so I decided to keep some of it to use. So always be thinking about those unconventional supplies that you can be using that would just make it a fun, unexpected thing for you to use. So I finished gluing that piece down and now adding a little bit more gesso into it. And I'm going to add just a little bit of gesso onto the right side as well, underneath where that tag is, just to bring in some of that same texture onto both sides. I hope that you guys enjoyed today's video, and if you're curious about any of the supplies that I'm using, check the description below first. I'm sure that I probably listed it. If I didn't, please let me know and I can find that for you. While you're here, go ahead and subscribe to my channel and like this video. It really helps me out, and I will see you guys next week. I hope that you guys have a good one.